Okay, so now we are going to use CloudNet rules. You can see that when you create CloudNet, you get a default rule which says, match any IP address, destination IP address, and use this particular net IP address. What it means is when CloudNet sees the traffic going through this particular IP address seeder range, in this case it is anywhere, this match actually translates to the destination IP, right? So if the destination IP is anything, then use the CloudNet IP address that we just specified, right? That's the default rule, right? Now let's assume a scenario where you have deployed an app or two apps on your virtual machines, and you need to give the IP addresses of these virtual machines to a third party, and that third party is going to whitelist those IP addresses that you give them, saying that as long as the traffic is coming from these particular IP addresses, it will be allowed, otherwise it will be denied, right? Because these are two different third party systems, two different vendors, we can't really use, we can technically give them this IP address and be done with that, and that will allow communication to those third party systems. But what happens is if you deploy more virtual machines in your GCP project, then everybody can continue to communicate with this third party system, which may or may not be desired, right? So that is one of the things that you want to keep in mind, that you want to make sure that when the traffic is going to these third party systems, they all get different IP addresses, so that there is no single point of failure, right? Because if that particular IP address for some reason you lose it, you don't end up losing communication to every third party system which has whitelisted that particular IP address, right? So in order to provide sort of high availability for the communication, we are going to set up CloudNet rules, and we are going to reserve a couple of more IP addresses, and we will set up those rules in such a way that we will tell CloudNet that, hey, if the traffic is going to this IP address, which is third party IP address 1, then use IP address 1 that we will reserve now. And if the traffic is going to the third party application number 2, then use another IP address, right? And for everything else, use this generic IP address, right? There was the reason I named this particular IP address as generic, right? So now that we understand the scenario, let's go ahead and see how we can actually get this done, right? So again, same thing, we will go to VPC network, IP addresses, and we are going to reserve a couple of IP addresses, right? So we are going to name this one CloudNet IP1, right? Click on reserve, and we are going to create one more saying CloudNet IP2, and we are going to say reserve. Okay, now our two IP addresses are reserved. They are static IP addresses. They are not used by anything right now, right? So now let's mimic the third party systems, right? So we go to virtual machines, right? And we are gonna create two virtual machines that we are gonna use them as our third party systems, right? So we are gonna name this third party system 1. We are going to leave everything as is. Now because this is a third party system, it will have public IP address, right? Because this is not in our control, right? This is somebody else's problem, how to secure it if it is exposed to the internet, right? We are just creating a mock setup to mimic these third party systems. They are not going to be in your GCP project, they'll be hosted somewhere else by somebody else, and it's like a vendor system, right? So we will leave everything as is, and we will say create. This third-party system will have public IP address, and now let's create one more instance. Third-party system 2. Looks more or less same, everything stays as is, and we say create. Now these are the two third-party systems that are gonna be up and coming. Okay, now just ignore the fact that they are here. In real life scenario, these two systems are not going to be here, they will be somewhere else. All you will get is IP address saying if you want to talk to our system, then use these two particular these IP addresses. Okay, so so what I have done is I have developed a very simple Python application which literally does nothing. All it does is it exposes Flask. It's a Flask application, and all it says is I'm going to return the source IP address. Source as in from where the request is coming from, right? Because that's what we want to verify, right? So every time I make the request, it will tell me the request is coming from these IP address, right? So that's what we want to know. Now I'm not gonna be deploying this ideally, but what I will do is I will just SSH into those systems and host the applications, and I will come back to this when I'm done with that. Okay, so I have set up the systems, and these are the two virtual machines, third-party virtual machines where systems are running. Now I need to do one more thing. I need to create firewall rule, because these Flask applications, they are actually running on port 5000. Create. Okay, so ignore this name, I missed the 0 there, but you get the idea, right? Now let's verify that these things are actually working, so let's go back to our compute engine, and just copy this, and we say http://:5000, and it is working. It is saying the request is coming from this IP address, which is technically my IP address. And let's do the same thing on the other one. Okay, so both these systems, third-party systems, are up and running. Now what we want to do is we want to set up our NAT rules, cloud NAT rules, do what we are supposed to do. So we go to cloud NAT, click on the NAT gateway, and we say edit. And what we are going to do is we are going to say add new rule, and we are going to say if the destination is this guy, right? This is the IP address or public IP of our third-party system 1. So we say that if the traffic is going to external IP of system third-party system 1, then use the IP address NAT IP1 and rule number. Now the thing about rule number is, it must be positive, of course, right? But the rule numbers are evaluated from 1 to 65,000, right? Where 1 is the highest and 65,000 is the lowest. You do not want to just start creating rules like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those sort of priorities. You want to leave yourself some room so that you can, make changes, right? So ideally, I will start with 1000 and, go from there, right? And we click on save. So what we are saying is, if the traffic is going to this IP address, which is third-party system 1's IP address, use this cloud NAT IP1. Save it. And because there is a comma here, save it. And that is done. We will add another rule. And we are gonna say, if the destination IP is the IP for system 2, then use NAT IP2, and I'm gonna number this one as 2000. And we say save. Oh, rule number. So that's what is happening. This thing is wonky. Save it. Now we have two rules, 1000 and 2000, and that's what is happening. So if we now do a curl from one of the systems to this IP, we should get cloud NAT IP1, or if we go to the other system, we should get cloud NAT IP2, right? So let's verify that. Do is, I will actually just SSH into this system, which is instance 1, and I will just say curl http:// external IP for our third-party system 1 :5000. Let's see what does this say. The request is coming from 35 to 32 91 245. Let's verify that's what we set up. There it is. So we are going to 34 70 76 98, and we want it to use .245 IP address, and you can see that, right? Now let's do the same thing on to, now let's go here on the second system. And you can see that now it says, the second system says the request is coming from NAT IP2. That is exactly what we wanted, right? But now if I just say curl ifconfig.co and say what happens, now it is saying that the external IP address of this system is .155. So .155 is the generic IP address that we said, and now this proves the point that you can set up cloud NAT rules and ask it to use different IP address based on what is the destination IP address is. So that is all for this cloud NAT demo or lesson, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. So I will see you in something else.